50,000 American troops are already stationed across the Middle East. 2 aircraft carriers patrol the Persian Gulf. Hundreds of airstrikes have hammered Iranian military infrastructure for 3 straight weeks. And yet, on Wednesday, the USS Boxer quietly slipped out of San Diego Harbor carrying 2,500 Marines trained specifically for one thing: getting from ship to shore. The question that now hangs over the entire conflict is no longer whether the United States can destroy Iran from the air. It is whether Washington is preparing to put boots on Iranian soil for the first time since the 1953 coup that overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh. Everything about this deployment, from its composition to its timing, suggests the war against Iran is entering a fundamentally new and far more dangerous phase. On March 18, 2026, the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group departed its home port of San Diego bound for the Middle East, according to reports confirmed by the Associated Press and Reuters. The group consists of 3 vessels: the USS Boxer, a Wasp-class amphibious assault ship capable of carrying F-35B stealth fighters, V-22 Osprey tiltrotors, and helicopters; the USS Portland, an amphibious transport dock designed for landing armored vehicles; and the USS Comstock, a dock landing ship focused on logistical support for amphibious operations. Together, they carry approximately 2,500 Marines from the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit based at Camp Pendleton, along with roughly 1,500 sailors, bringing total personnel aboard the 3 vessels to about 4,000. The deployment was not announced in advance for security reasons, and a Navy spokesperson initially characterized it to NBC San Diego as a routine operation in the Indo-Pacific. But multiple officials speaking to the Associated Press and Reuters confirmed that the ships are heading to the Middle East, where they will join an already massive American military presence. This comes on the heels of another amphibious group, led by the USS Tripoli and carrying the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit with about 2,500 Marines, which was redirected from the Philippine Sea to the Middle East earlier in the week. Combined, these 2 amphibious deployments will add roughly 5,000 Marines and sailors to the region, forces whose primary purpose is conducting operations that transition from sea to land. The timing is critical. The United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28, 2026, striking targets across Iran in a coordinated campaign that killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and numerous other senior officials. 3 weeks later, the war shows no sign of ending. Iran has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes. And on the same day the Boxer departed, the news site Axios reported that the Trump administration is actively discussing sending ground forces to Kharg Island, the small coral outcrop in the Persian Gulf that handles 90% of Iran's oil exports. The current conflict did not erupt from a vacuum. It represents the culmination of decades of escalating tensions between the United States and Iran, punctuated by a series of crises that steadily narrowed the space for diplomacy. The foundational grievance, from Tehran's perspective, traces back to 1953, when the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after he nationalized the country's oil industry. That event installed the Shah as an authoritarian monarch and seeded a resentment that would fuel the 1979 Islamic Revolution and shape Iranian foreign policy for generations. From Washington's perspective, the defining concern has been Iran's nuclear program, which by mid-2025 had produced over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, enough for an estimated 4 to 5 nuclear warheads if further enriched, according to International Atomic Energy Agency data. In June 2025, the United States and Israel carried out Operation Midnight Hammer, a limited set of strikes targeting Iran's enrichment facilities at Fordow and Natanz and its metallurgy facilities at Isfahan. The operation damaged Iran's nuclear infrastructure significantly, but intelligence later indicated that Tehran had begun reconstituting parts of its enrichment program at a previously undisclosed site. Then, in January 2026, Iran was convulsed by its largest wave of protests since the Islamic Revolution. Iranian security forces responded with lethal force, killing thousands of demonstrators, according to multiple human rights organizations. President Trump threatened military action in response. A massive American military buildup followed, including the deployment of the aircraft carriers USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford. Indirect nuclear negotiations took place in Muscat and then Geneva in February, and Oman's foreign minister announced a breakthrough on February 27th. The very next day, the United States and Israel launched their surprise attack. The war has since expanded well beyond Iran's borders. Tehran has retaliated with missile and drone strikes against Israel, against American military bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, and has effectively shut down commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. According to NBC News, more than 2,000 people have been killed across the region, including over 1,300 in Iran, according to the Iranian Red Crescent Society, at least 1,000 in Lebanon following an Israeli ground invasion launched on March 17th, and 13 American service members. The geopolitical chessboard of this conflict is crowded with players whose interests often diverge even when their alliances overlap. For the United States under President Trump, the stated objectives of Operation Epic Fury are fourfold, according to a CSIS analysis of Trump's Truth Social announcement: preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, destroying its missile arsenal and production sites, degrading its proxy networks, and annihilating its navy. But there is also a desired political outcome that goes well beyond military objectives: regime change from within. Trump framed the strikes as a counter-proliferation operation and told Iranians directly that the hour of your freedom is at hand. The problem, as multiple analysts have noted, is that air power alone cannot manufacture political alternatives. As one analyst cited by Al Jazeera put it, the United States can destroy Iran's hardware, but cannot create a political alternative from the air. For Israel, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the war represents the fulfillment of a long-standing strategic objective. Netanyahu told reporters that no two leaders have been as coordinated as Trump and himself, insisting that he did not drag the United States into the conflict. But Netanyahu has also publicly stated that regime change requires a ground component, telling the press that one cannot make a revolution from the air. Israel launched a ground invasion of southern Lebanon on March 17th to strike at Hezbollah infrastructure. Iran, now under the leadership of Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the slain supreme leader who was elected on March 8th, has adopted a strategy of asymmetric retaliation. Unable to match American and Israeli air superiority, Tehran has turned to its strengths, closing the Strait of Hormuz using drone boats, naval mines, and missile threats against commercial shipping, launching retaliatory strikes against Gulf states that host American military bases, and threatening to attack oil infrastructure across the region if its own facilities are hit. The IRGC has declared that Iran, not the United States, will determine when the war ends. The Gulf states find themselves in an acutely uncomfortable position. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar have all come under Iranian attack despite their varying degrees of alignment with Washington. According to a JINSA analysis, 45% of Iranian attacks on March 16th targeted Saudi Arabia alone, up from 20% the previous day. Qatar has halted liquefied natural gas production after Iranian drones struck its facilities. Yet these nations have been reluctant to join active military operations, and multiple European and Indo-Pacific allies, including Germany, Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom, have rejected Trump's call to send warships to secure the Strait of Hormuz. China watches with particular concern. As the largest importer of Iranian oil, purchasing over 80% of Iran's crude according to Kepler data, Beijing faces a direct threat to its energy security. Roughly 40% of China's oil imports transit the Strait of Hormuz. China has significant strategic oil reserves, estimated at about 1 billion barrels, but a prolonged disruption would create severe economic pressure. The economic consequences of this war are already reverberating across the globe, and the deployment of amphibious forces capable of seizing territory threatens to deepen them further. The effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz has produced what energy analyst Bob McNally, a former advisor to President George W. Bush, called to CBS News the biggest energy disruption in history. Brent crude oil prices surged past $100 per barrel on March 8th for the first time in 4 years, reaching a peak of $126 per barrel, according to data compiled by Wikipedia's synthesis of market reports. As of mid-March, Brent was trading around $103 per barrel. In the United States, gasoline prices have jumped to $3.68 per gallon, up from $2.94 a month earlier, according to 8AA data. The disruption extends far beyond oil. According to UNCTAD, the Strait of Hormuz carries roughly a quarter of global seaborne oil trade, along with significant volumes of liquefied natural gas and fertilizers. Qatar, one of the world's largest LNG providers, has halted production. Fertilizer prices at the New Orleans hub have surged from $475 per metric ton to $680 per metric ton, according to CNBC, raising alarm about food inflation during the American Midwest planting season. The Dallas Federal Reserve published an analysis estimating that a one-quarter closure of the strait would raise the average West Texas intermediate oil price to $98 per barrel and lower global real GDP growth by an annualized 2.9 percentage points. Goldman Sachs has raised its odds of a United States recession this year to 25%. Oxford Economics modeled a scenario in which oil prices average $140 per barrel for 2 months, which they described as a breaking point that would push the Eurozone, the United Kingdom, and Japan into economic contraction. The Pentagon itself is not immune to the financial strain. According to President Trump, the Department of Defense is preparing to request an additional $200 billion from Congress to fund the war, a figure that would represent a massive supplemental appropriation. Kharg Island sits at the nexus of all these economic pressures. The island handles approximately 90% of Iran's crude exports and has storage capacity for roughly 30 million barrels, according to Kapler. Analysts at BCA Research, cited by Euronews, estimate that removing Kharg from global supply would eliminate 1.5 to 2 million barrels per day. Seizing it rather than destroying it would give the United States enormous economic leverage, but the risks of escalation are equally enormous. Iran has explicitly warned that any attack on its oil infrastructure would trigger retaliatory strikes against energy facilities across the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia's massive Abqaiq processing plant. The deployment of the Boxer amphibious ready group has intensified a debate among military analysts about what comes next and whether a ground operation is either wise or inevitable. According to Axios, a senior administration official stated that Trump wants the Strait of Hormuz open, and if he has to take Kharg Island to make that happen, it will happen. A second senior official told the same outlet that the president would do what is right and that no decision had been made, but declined to rule anything out. Senator Tom Cotton, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, told Axios that Trump had been prudent not to exclude a ground invasion and that the president had mountains of plans for the Strait of Hormuz contingency. Military experts are sharply divided on the feasibility. Mark Gustafson, former head of the White House Situation Room, told CNBC that Trump may be tempted to seize Kharg Island because controlling it would give the United States leverage without destroying an asset that a future Iranian government might need. An Iranian-American analyst cited by Time noted that the March 13 strikes on Kharg destroyed the runway, naval base, air defenses, and mine storage, exactly the targets one neutralizes before an amphibious or airborne assault. But skeptics warn the operation could become a catastrophe. Former United States Army intelligence analyst Harrison Mann, who resigned from the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2024, told Democracy Now! That any attempt to seize Kharg Island would be close to a suicide mission. The island sits only 25 kilometers from the Iranian mainland, well within range of surviving Iranian drones and missiles. Mann also argued that from day 2 of the war, the Trump administration has not known what to do and how to get out of it. The broader strategic question, as outlined by Joe Funderburk in an analysis cited by SOF News, is that the United States is prosecuting the war with only one instrument of national power, military force, while Iran is using all 5 instruments. This asymmetry, he argued, transforms military success at the tactical and operational level into strategic failure. Lawrence Friedman, writing for his SAMF Substack, described the conflict as a split-screen war. One screen shows the United States and Israel with complete domination of the skies, while the other shows Iran holding the ground, the Gulf states under attack, and the Strait of Hormuz closed. A CNN poll conducted shortly after the war began showed Americans opposed sending ground troops to Iran by a 5-to-1 margin, 60% to 12%. Even among Republicans, opposition ran into double digits. The political risks for the administration are substantial. The ripple effects of this conflict and the prospect of a ground escalation are being felt across virtually every continent. Asia is bearing the most immediate economic pain. According to CNBC, citing Nomura Research, Thailand, India, South Korea, and the Philippines are the most vulnerable to higher oil prices due to their high import dependence. India faces a particularly acute dual shock. More than half of its LNG imports are linked to the Gulf, and roughly 60% of its oil imports come from the Middle East. Japan, which sources about 70% of its oil imports through the Strait of Hormuz, has begun releasing strategic reserves. Pakistan has requested that Saudi Arabia reroute oil supplies through the Red Sea port of Yanbu. Europe faces its own energy crisis. According to UNCTAD data, about 12 to 14% of Europe's LNG comes from Qatar through the Strait of Hormuz. Major shipping companies Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd have suspended their Middle East routes. The disruption to fertilizer trade threatens agricultural costs heading into the growing season. Multiple European NATO allies have rejected Trump's call to send warships to the strait, straining the transatlantic alliance at a moment of maximum tension. In the Middle East itself, the humanitarian toll continues to mount. The conflict has displaced millions in Iran and Lebanon. According to the Jinsa update, Iran has expanded its attacks to include not only Gulf states but also Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Cyprus, in what analysts at the Soufan Center describe as a campaign designed to signal the risks of close alignment with the United States and Israel. Iraq's oil exports have been curtailed. Qatar's LNG production has been disrupted. The International Energy Agency took the unprecedented step of pledging to release 400 million barrels from strategic reserves, but analysts say this provides only about 20 days of relief relative to normal strait traffic. The International Energy Agency release amounts to a temporary bridge, not a solution. As one analyst told Al Jazeera, the release may soften the shock and calm nerves temporarily, but it will remain limited as long as the fundamental problem, the freedom of supply and tanker movement through the Strait of Hormuz, remains unresolved. Several critical indicators will determine whether this conflict escalates further or finds a path toward de-escalation. First, the transit route and timeline of the Boxer and Tripoli amphibious groups. Military officials have indicated the Boxer group will transit through the Indo-Pacific before entering the Middle East. The USS Tripoli was spotted near Malaysia on March 17th. Once both groups are on station, the United States will have roughly 5,000 Marines with amphibious assault capability positioned near Iran, a force that could be used for a Kharg Island operation or for securing portions of the Iranian coastline adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz. Second, Iran's response to the March 13th strikes on Kharg Island's military infrastructure. Tehran has warned that attacks on its oil facilities would trigger retaliatory strikes on energy assets across the Gulf. Whether Iran follows through on those threats if oil infrastructure is targeted will determine whether the economic fallout deepens dramatically. Third, the Pentagon's $200 billion supplemental budget request. Its reception in Congress will signal both the anticipated duration of the conflict and the degree of political support for escalation. Congressional debate over this funding could become a proxy battle over the war's future direction. Fourth, the status of the Strait of Hormuz. Iraq's oil minister said on March 17th that Baghdad is in contact with Tehran to negotiate allowing ships to pass. Any movement on reopening commercial traffic would significantly reduce the pressure for a ground operation. And fifth, domestic polling and political dynamics within the United States. With Americans opposed to ground troops by wide margins, the political calculus for the administration may prove as constraining as military realities on the ground. What began on February 28th as an air and naval campaign is now, 3 weeks later, inching toward a fundamentally different kind of war. The deployment of amphibious forces trained to move from sea to shore, to the same theater where the world's most strategically vital oil infrastructure sits on a coral island 25 kilometers from a hostile coastline, marks a threshold moment. The decisions made in Washington and Tehran over the coming days will not just shape the course of this conflict. They will determine whether the global economy endures a manageable shock or faces its most severe disruption since the 1970s. The answer lies somewhere between the bridges of those 3 ships now crossing the Pacific and the shallow waters around an island most people had never heard of a month ago.